Hey, this is Shondell Joyce, and welcome to painting this cute little bird in pastels. So I'm using an ampersand pastel board and a homemade pastel. So I made this pastel out of bits and pieces of Mount Vision pastels I'd used. I'm doing an underpainting and then covering it with alcohol, which melts the pastel down into the tooth of the ampersand board. This dissolves the pastel completely and creates a really misty effect. So the alcohol will dry quickly. The higher the percentage of alcohol, the quicker it'll dry. I've covered the whole thing, it's dry, and now I'm going to work on the composition. I'm deciding where to put the focal point. You can see that the bird is going to be the focal point. In the value study I did, I want to have all the branches kind of play off the bird and get the bird out of the dead center, move it over to the side, make it a little more interesting. I almost never do a photo directly from a photo reference. Always want to change it. Next, I'm going to set up my palette. So I've already tried out a few colors, so I have an idea of the colors I'm going to use. The value sketch is helpful in making the colors. The first two are the darkest darks, and these are going to be hard pastels. They're a dark black and a cordovan brown. The next is a gray, so it's more of a cool gray for some of the branches. It's also a hard pastel. It's a Creta color. Next is a deep, intense chocolate brown, and it's going to be a 5 value. It's pretty dark, so I'm putting it in on the black side, or maybe a 4. In the middle, I have some of the worms of the leaves. Now, this is more of an orange or a rust terracotta color. It's a beautiful orange to contrast with the blue of the bird. In addition to that, I'm using a lighter version of the same orange for the curled up parts of the leaves, and then the blue for the bird. So these are very different colors, but they're the same value. So you can see the values are all middle. They're the color, not in light and not in shadow. So that would be local color. Now for the twos. Twos are some of the lighter colors. I'm using a yellow. This particular yellow is more of an ochre, like a yellow ochre. In addition, I'm using a light blue. This is a cool white, light blue, similar to the background. And then on top of it, I'm using a warm white. The warm white will contrast nicely with the cool blue. So there's my palette. It's all laid out. And next I'm putting the lines for the rule of thirds onto my surface so you can see where those points will be. This will help me sketch. I'm using the hard pastel. This is the new pastel cordovan. And I'm sketching some of the lines of the branches using the edge of the pastel. To get a straight line, you want to use an edge in a pastel, and that will help give you the thinnest line possible. I'm making these branches very architectural. They should contrast quite well with the background. Background should be lost edges. The hard edges are in the branches and the bird in the foreground. Now I'm lightly sketching out the shapes of the leaves. I want these to be very organic, very light. I'll go back over these with color. Now for the bird is our focal point. So I'm going to show you a trick. If you don't want to have to draw the bird, if it's a little complicated, take a photo reference, cover the back side of it with pastel, flip it over, make sure it's sized correctly, and then trace the bird onto the composition. That's one way. You can see the ghost-like image of it on the surface. If you prefer, sketch it out. Start with the basic shape of the head, locate where the eye goes, the beak is almost straight across, then the big shape of the chest, connect the two, and then the shape of the body, the wing, cover some of the darks, and then pull the rest of the body based on that. Almost every sketch is made up of simple shapes, so just locate the first big shape and build all of your other shapes based on that one. I'm erasing some of my guidelines so that my sketch is clear to me. I'm using a dry brush, and that lifts up the pastel nicely. Now I have everything laid out, and it's time to start painting. I have my sketch in place. So I'm starting with the darkest dark, and I'm using a mole stick to keep me from smearing my sketch. The mole stick I lay flat and I balance my hand on it. I'm using the hard new pastel, putting in the darkest darks, and then I'm using the hard gray pastel, which is a value 4, putting in the legs and the feet, some of the branches, and just thickening some of the lines of the branches. This gives them a little more shape and definition without making them darker than the bird itself. I want the bird to be the focal point. Nobody should upstage our diva. So I'm still using the gray, still sketching. I feel like I have a lot of the darks in place. I'm going to start fleshing out the branch with brown. This is the value 4, dark chocolate brown. I'm putting it towards the center of some of these branches, using it to help shape some of the edges, the dried edges of the leaves. The brown is not quite as intense as the black on the bird. I want to keep that the darkest dark in the whole painting, so that way your eye is pulled straight to the eye of the bird, and the beak and the black on the back of the bird leads you through the composition. There's the shape of the leaf. Now I have the shape of the branches, putting a little bit of dark in the crest on the bird, and filling in the 3 value. I don't want to add a lot of color to this. It's washed out by the snow. So I'm using the same color on the bluebird's breast as the leaves. This will help with the camouflage. I'm painting in the middle values. So these are the 3 values now. I'm working from dark to light. Started with my darkest darks and moved methodically through the 5s, the 4s, and the 3s. We're in the 3s now. I'm using some of the lighter color of the orange to show the curve in the leaf. This is the light parts of the leaves. Still in the 3s. It's a lighter color than the orange, but the value is still very similar. It's not much different in value. Put a little bit on the bird for good standing. Now we have a good chest on that bluebird. Blends in with the leaves on the tree. Now for the blue. This is an intense blue. It's the complement of the orange. The two are going to play well together in the sandbox. Putting in the blue on the back of the bluebird. Putting in the tail. And I'm just going to add a touch of it to other places, on the branches, and so forth, just so that it's not all concentrated in one spot. You want it to pull the eye around, not be an eye magnet that holds you in one place. Little touches of blue. Okay, so now we're up to the 2s. The 2 is a cool blue. This is some of the reflected light that's reflecting off of the bird's eyelids and the bird's feathers and plumage. It helps to give some texture to the feathers, give some shape to the bird, a roundedness to that form. I'm also going to use this light blue for part of the plumage under the tail. Now for a little blending. On the bird, I want it to be soft and blended. Have a texture difference between the bird itself and the leaves. The leaves are crispy and crunchy, scumbled, pastel, unblended. The bird has some beautiful blending which softens the feathers, creates some beautiful texture, makes it more painterly. Sharpening the crisp lines of dark on the wings and the beak. I'm using a paintbrush to clean up the edges. Dry paintbrushes act like erasers. Sometimes I use a sharpened leadless pencil to create a harder edge. I'm pretty happy with the bird at this point, and I've negative space painted to make the background pretty sharp up against the bird. Now I'm using that same light blue on some of the branches. This is giving them some shape. They're reflecting some of the light from the snow and the sky. This again is a cool bluish color, so a cool light. It's about a 2 value. It's also going to be some of the color of the snow. It's pretty close to the color of the background. I accidentally hit the beak with my finger, so I'm fixing it. These things happen. Fixing mistakes is almost half of the painting process, I believe. Next, I want to create some texture in the background. Here's the same blue I used for the background previously. I'm building up the texture on top of the branches. This is a broken piece of pastel, and it's some of that lighter color. I use Mount Vision pastels, very pure pigments, very soft, but not too soft that they crumble in your hands. Just soft enough to give you some surface that you can lay down on a toothy board like the ampersand pastel board. So this is my lightest light. It's an intense, warmer white. It contrasts a little with the light blue of the background. And I'm working it away around the whole composition. It's the snow that's accumulating on the branches around the bird. It's building up on the branches, so I'm trying to keep the piles of snow on the branches on the same side so that they're logical. And it gives you a sense of a snowy day looking out your window. It's hard to imagine as I sit here in Florida. I haven't seen snow in years, but I do remember it well. Now, once I have the snow on the branches, I'm going to make some large clumps of snow, making little dots. Trying not to be too perfect in the placement of these dots. You don't want it to look like polka dots, but you do want it to look atmospheric, like there's clumps. Then I'm going to take my finger and just twist, make some of these dots disappear so that they become lost and more distant in the background. So I'm twisting, just turning my hand a little. Next, I'm going to make some smaller dots. These are more of a medium size, and fill in the gaps between them. And again, try not to make a pattern. You don't want them to be too uniform. Next, I'm dusting. Dusting is when you scrape a hard surface across a soft pastel and you splatter paint the pigment onto the surface. So I'm splattering small little droplets of pigment. It's dry, so it's just dust. And now I'm putting something heavy on top of it to push that dust down into the tooth of the board. And voila, there you have it. There's some interesting effects to use in pastel. If you'd like to paint along with me, join me for a weekly online painting class